And welcome back to Accessible Expeditions. Today we're going to talk about considerations when you're selecting shore excursions.
The first thing we want to mention is to remember that most cruises stop in at least one foreign port. So when you're in a foreign port, the ADA does not apply in those ports, so you want to gather as much information as possible before you travel.
When a cruise ship stops in port, there are two different types of ways to get ashore. Most stops, you're going to go down a walkway right onto the pier. In some ports, however, you're going to have to tender to the pier. When you tender, your cruise ship actually anchors further away from the pier and have to board a smaller boat, usually the lifeboats, which will shuttle you from the cruise ship back to port.
Typically, when you disembark in a port, there's a separate entrance for people with mobility issues and their group, so you need to be sure to ask staff where you should go. You may not exit with the majority of the other cruise passengers. Sometimes, especially when you're tendering, it is difficult for people who use scooters and wheelchairs to even get off the ship. So I really recommend that you talk to the cruise staff ahead of time so you know exactly what to expect when you're in each port.
Shore excursions are a big part of cruising. We're going to be talking about the excursions that are offered by the cruise lines themselves. We are not addressing independent excursions that you can get when you're off the ship at any port.
Once you decide which cruise you're going to go on and you start looking at the shore excursions, the first thing you want to look at is whether or not there are any excursions that are actually labeled as accessible. Obviously, if an excursion is labeled as fully accessible, anyone with mobility disabilities should be okay to take those tours. We are going to look at several different varieties of shore excursions. We're going to be using Carnival Cruise Lines as an example. It is similar to all cruise lines, but it could be a little bit different. So with using Carnival specifically, they have two ways that they label their accessible excursions, and it makes a difference in how you book your excursion.
The first way, they have an excursion that is simply labeled as accessible, and they have a wheelchair symbol at the bottom. When booking these excursions, you will book all members of your party on this excursion. The second kind is one that is labeled as accessible, wheelchair only. When a short excursion is labeled like this, it impacts on how you book. So for the excursions that are labeled as wheelchair only, there will be a second excursion with the same name that is not accessible. When you choose to book this excursion, you'll book the members of your group who utilize a wheelchair or scooter on the accessible excursion and all other members of your group on the non-accessible option for the short excursion. You will be on the same excursion together, but you have to book them separately. Unfortunately, the fully accessible excursions are few and far between. I really hope that they would start to make more excursions more accessible in the future. But right now, they're not that many examples. For example, we're taking a 9-day cruise to the British Isles this summer, and we are stopping in 6 ports. Only 2 excursions out of all of the excursions in all the ports are fully accessible. Just because an excursion is not labeled as accessible doesn't mean you can't take it. When an excursion is labeled as accessible, what it means is everything, including the transportation, can be accessed while still in a wheelchair or mobility device. Meaning that the buses, they have lifts to get you in and out. Other excursions may not be labeled as accessible because they do not have a lift for the bus or transportation. But if you're able to transfer and board, it still might be an option for you. Make sure you go on each description and read what it says. On Carnival's descriptions, they have a selection that tells you a lot of information, and then sometimes they'll tell you what the roads are like. Or they'll say the amount of walking depends on the participant, or that they'll say a collapsible wheelchair can or can't be stored. One of the best shore excursions that we have ever done was a private van tour. You pay one price for your whole group, not per person, which honestly ends up being cheaper than some of the other tours. You get a private van so you can put your wheelchair or scooter in and out of the back of the van when you decide what sites you want to go see. We did this in the Dominican Republic, and it was absolutely fantastic. I would definitely recommend this shore excursion.
A lot of excursions have no information, and unfortunately we have found that there's no way to really talk to people ahead of time. There's no phone number to call for a shore excursions desk. There's no email to send for a shore excursions desk. So what we would recommend is that you go to the shore excursion desk as soon as you get on board. Now, like a lot of things, who you get to talk to can really make a big difference. We have gotten people who basically give you the description and say, I don't know, this is all we know. And then we've actually gotten people who will call ahead to the actual shore excursion operators, and we'll talk to them and find out what accommodations, if any, they actually have available.
With shore excursions, more than anything else, you really need to ask what accommodations they have. If you're going to the beach, ask if there's sand wheelchairs available. If they're cabanas or a beach, typically they have one or two that are accessible. What you have to remember, though, is the ports do not have to comply with the ADA because they are outside the United States. And so they may not be as accessible as what you're used to.
We hope this helps you in planning your shore excursions.
Now that summer is upon us, we're going to start to do our vacations. We will bring you information and reviews on specific cruise ships and ports as we go. We're going to be looking forward to sharing our travels with you and helping you navigate the world of traveling with disabilities. Thank you for watching, and as always,
like and subscribe.